Welcome to the Agency Initiative podcast hosted by Kristen Cavanaugh and Mike Randolph. Authentic people, courageous stories. This podcast is sponsored by the Agency Initiative with the intention of building agency for the moments that matter. For more information about the Agency Initiative and to start your journey, check out www.agency-initiative.com. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another episode of the Agency Initiative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Randolph, and I'm joined by my co-host and leader of the Agency Initiative, Kristen Cavanaugh.
Welcome, everybody.
Hey, everybody. We're back again. We're excited to continue our journey on this introductory series called Agency Unlocked, where we're diving into our founding concepts of agency, courage, and self-love, authenticity, and making intentional decisions in the moments that matter. Today's episode is called Courage, and it continues our agency journey by examining connections between agency and self-love in the pursuit of authentic, values-driven leadership. Kristen, courage is a concept that hits really close to home for you, I know. You learned a lot about courage as a Marine. What was that like?
Yeah, it was one of the core values of the Marine Corps, honor, courage, and commitment. And so from day one, we're taught about what that means and what it looks like and the responsibility of a leader to make sure that you're showing up courageously. And so this has been, a part of my life. It actually goes back before the Marine Corps, back to the time when I was at the Naval Academy. So that was part of the leadership values there as well. And so from 17 on, I've been thinking about courage and the role that it plays in my leadership and my everyday life. And so it feels like, we're coming full circle to finally talk about what that can look like in a couple different lights, maybe not in the Marine Corps sense, but how to help every leader show up courageously and powerfully in the workplace and in their lives around them.
It's one of our core values. It is one of our core values as a company. We made the decision early on to say courage is going to be one of the things that we stand for as a company. And you introduced that at your USC speech. You allude to it being a love story, talking about courage, talking about love, but not one that the audience would expect from Marine. Why did you say it was going to be a love story, but not one that they'd expect from Marine? What was the intention behind that?
Right. I think people have an image that pops into their mind when they hear Marine and think of Marine. And I really like destroying that visual image.
Sure.
And I think it gets people to think, well, wait a minute. First I like being a woman and a Black woman saying I'm a Marine. And so that typically doesn't register
Sure.
for people. And then you throw courage in there and people think they know what courage looks like for Marines on the battlefield and, with their Marines around them. And yeah, that's it sometimes, but not all the time. And so I really like creating that dissonance for people to have them take a pause and ask themselves if the image and the connotation that they're thinking about is actually true.
Yeah.
And in this case, I knew it wasn't. So it was a really fun moment for me to say, nope, we're going to do something different. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit to put this connection into place.
Well, it's you could hear it in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
You could see it in their reaction and hear it in the audience. Saying they laugh at that moment in the speech, and it's obviously it's a point, right? It's a point where you say hey, this isn't what you think it's going to be, and everyone gets it in that moment because they can see you on the stage. One of my favorite stories about you being a veteran, about you challenging folks or creating this dissonance for folks was you were sitting on a panel, leading a panel at one of our factories at Tesla, and you had someone walk up to you afterward and saying this is a great panel, but there wasn't any veteran representation on there. Tell me a little bit about that and what that moment was like for you.
I love those moments.
Okay.
I think for a lot of people, everybody has different opinions, but for me, that means I've done my job. I have created some dissonance for people to say, hold up, I'm going to call you out on something. And I get to redirect back and say, oh, that's interesting that you think that there were no veterans on a panel. What about me? I'm a veteran. Did it ever cross your mind that maybe there could be a woman, a Black woman, a Black gay woman that could be a veteran? And then I just watch the minds explode. That's what I need.
Yeah.
I actually need people to just assume that they're veterans of all shapes, sizes, colors, genders, in the military.
Sure.
But that's a moment of awakening for somebody where they've literally never given it a thought. that there could be somebody other than a white man,
right,
as a veteran.
And they see though, like it's obviously like people are going to see their colleagues in the military all the time, but to like pull that back out into real life where they're not in that setting anymore, like that's something that like, wow, snaps them right back into it. Like, oh wait, there are people out there who don't look like me or like walk and talk like me that are part of the military and that represent, you know, a veteran.
Yeah. And I think, and there's a piece of courage that comes into that.
Yeah.
Right. It's really easy to let those moments go by and to not have the courage to correct someone, to say, no, you're actually mistaken. I am a veteran and here's my experience. And so I think it's really easy for folks to just move past those moments and not bother to help someone have a moment of learning. Because sometimes it can get contentious and that can be scary. And so you have to call upon this courage to say, wait a minute, here's an opportunity for someone to learn, and I'm willing to be the vehicle by which they do that. And so I obviously see that in the veteran sense. I see it a lot in the LGBTQ community sense, where people make assumptions, you know, and I went through a large part of my life where people would ask about my boyfriend or make comments about my husband, and I let them go. And now it's like, there's no way I'm going to let those moments go, because I've learned to bring it to self-love. Like, I've learned I love myself enough, and I'm confident and comfortable enough with who I am to be able to say, no, you're mistaken, and here's the actual truth that's going on. And so a lot of the work that I had to do around self-love and being courageous in those moments are inextricably connected.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings me to one of my questions, honestly. Like, what compelled you to tell a love story about courage? You know, your speech and the way that we present it to that audience at USC is it's a love story, but it's a love story about courage, but not one that you would expect from a Marine. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what made you want to tell that love story about courage?
Yeah, I mean, courage comes from the heart, and you have to start with yourself. I believe you have to start with yourself first and learn how to love yourself first before you can have courage almost in any other sense. And so it was important for me to help people understand that's a piece of it too. Like, you can learn to love yourself and all of yourself for who you are. And I'll be honest, I think we had this conversation about, hey, should we be talking about how much I love myself?
Sure.
Like,
yes.
You know, and I think there's a way where it becomes overuse and not the intention of what we're having. But I think here in this sense, we were talking about having the courage to look deeply at who you are and what you care about and your values, and be honest and unapologetic about all of those things and how it comes together to make you uniquely who you are. You can love that person, all of that person. And it takes courage, especially in, you know, society like we have today, where you're hearing all of these messages from, you know, the media or from pundits or from family members. It feels like it's coming at all angles, telling you that these parts of you, or the values that you hold, or the beliefs that you hold, aren't correct or aren't lovable. And so the journey that people can go through to learn and learn to love all parts of them, I think, is really important. And so I think having a Marine tell you that, you know, especially a Marine that's been to war, right? Like that has seen courage in some different lights, say, but yeah, just as importantly, you have to learn how to love yourself too.
Yeah. We see in media, we see in stories told courage about a number of different things, right? But it's almost always it's an external locus of courage. I'm having courage for, members of my squad on the battlefield. I'm having courage for members of my team on a sport, in a specific sporting event or a specific sporting instance. Having courage to save someone's life, going into a burning building. That's all external locus of courage, and not very rarely, but I think it's more difficult to find concrete examples of courage for having courage to love yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you felt so compelled to tell that story too, is tell this story, is because it's not easy for people to love themselves.
No.
It's not easy for people to look in the mirror and say, this is who I am. This is all of who I am. And I love me for me in that sense. And yeah, it is a little bit over the top when we talk about I love me, I love me, I love me, because but it's not an arrogant sense. It really is more of a self-actualization sense of trying to understand who you are and being comfortable with that, and being comfortable with that in your own skin. That's the self-love component of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You don't see a lot of those stories told, but there are people every day that are faced with that challenge. And some of us get there. I won't even say some of us. Some people get there. I still work on it every single day.
Yeah,
there are still times and places where it's challenging for me to love all of myself. And I think the more we can get comfortable and feel like we're able to love ourselves, and just as much as we love something or someone externally, then that might help some of the other issues down the road that we have, right? And so I think we need to hear more stories about people falling in love with themselves, whether it's Marines or whether it's executives or whether it's like cops. Like we need people that really understand deeply who they are and what they value and how to own that, and and present it to the world.
Yeah. Well, last episode we talked about the connection between power and agency, and got a little bit into the connection between values and power as well. And talking about like when your values are out of alignment with your environment, all of that. But to really understand your values, to your point, you got to do a little bit of work to get there. A lot of it. Consistent set of work all the time, almost, it feels like. You went through a lot of self-examination to get to that point, and to understand this concept of courage alongside of it. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 43 years old, and I'm still working on it every single day. Yeah. I think sometimes I didn't have a choice but to learn. Like, as we talked about, there were times where it was just in my face that I was different or assumed to be something that I wasn't. And so the more and more times those situations happened, that was an opportunity for me to look myself in the mirror and say, what am I going to do about this? Who am I? And what am I going to do about this? And the longer I took those looks in the mirror, and the more I felt safety in taking those looks and going deeper and sharing those thoughts with people, the more comfortable I got with what I was seeing in the mirror. But it wasn't a journey that I could take by myself.
I was going to ask about that. Like, what was your community like as part of that?
Right. I mean, I had a veterans community. I had an LGBTQ community. I had a fantastic coach. I had a work community. I had friends and family. And so, I was finding community in all of these spaces and bringing together an understanding of what all these identities meant and what they meant to me, and then how they all came together and formed, the identity that I hold today. And that continues to change and grow over time, but it was a lifelong process in understanding that. And I remember my mom and I having a conversation when I came out to her. It may not have been when I came out to her. It was after I did my first TED Talk, and it really hit home for her how, at that point it had taken me like 32 or 33 years to come to terms with where I was at there. And my mom and I were having this conversation, and she didn't have 33 years of experience with this at that point, right? And so giving people grace to learn and to understand and work through, whatever it is that you're facing, it can't be like an instantaneous switch for people or like understanding for people. And, you know, my mom like loves me unconditionally and has been supportive from day one. But I had to give her a little bit of grace to be like,
a little time.
Yeah, you haven't been thinking about this,
Yeah.
you know, obsessively for 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, it's been 15 minutes and I appreciate that. And so I think that's a big component too of having the courage to maybe even sit in the discomfort.
I think that's a huge
bit.
part. Yes.
Yeah, and sit in the discomfort of people around you a bit in the with the goal of helping everybody kind of get through it.
Yeah. I think there's some real value in being okay with the discomfort. Both when looking at yourself in the mirror, but also when allowing other people that space to kind of absorb that moment.
Exactly.
Like that's the first story we talked about in the podcast. You know, the instance at Tesla where you had the person walk up to you and say, "What about veterans? Or why aren't they?" But like that was a moment where you got to really embrace the discomfort for that, because the discomfort represents this space of change.
Exactly. And I have to learn, and I think this is, you know, something that's really coming into focus for me. Others people's discomfort, that's not my
No.
you know, bag to hold.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of times, and you know, as we're thinking about the courage to step into these moments and to be who you are and to bring your values and your identities to the table, sometimes the fear is, you know, about some kind of judgment or about some kind of, you know, feeling somebody is going to have towards you. But when you start to think about what's the feeling I have about myself and who I am, and maybe I should put that first and not really care about other people's discomfort and feelings. I think that's where you start to get some of the power back to say, all right, I'm going to say this. I'm going to correct you because I have a wife and not a husband. And you can use that as a moment of learning. I'm going to offer that up to you as a moment for you to grow, but I'm not going to take on your discomfort or your feelings about me, because that's not mine. It's yours.
Yeah.
And I think that's where kind of the power comes into this and the love comes into this. I love myself enough to stand up for who I am and to let you choose to grow or not. But it's not going to be on me.
Yeah. Did self-love or values come first? Was it about self-love first and that exploration of self-love, or was it, I understand what's important to me and that's going to help shape my journey and loving myself? Or, you know, walk me through that.
Values came first for me.
Okay.
And so I would say that you get values from different places, right? So I obviously got values from my family and values from my faith and values from school and, you know, and education, values from the Naval Academy. And so I'm like collecting values in all of these different areas. And there's some sorting that kind of has to happen as you get older and move forward to understand what these mean, right? And so, and how those look for you at that moment in your life. And so I think as I was maturing and understanding who I was, it was like that was getting layered on top of this foundational set of values that I had from all of those different places. And I had to see how they fit together or didn't fit together or what they meant together. And I realized that it didn't have to be an either or, you know, and I think that was the real struggle as I was coming out. It's because I thought all of it was absolute.
Yeah.
And so I either had the values of integrity or I had the values of, you know, courage, or I had the values of love, or I could be gay.
Yeah. I think you're coming to a point where your identities and your values don't have to be disparate, right? It was at the moment of self-actualization, or again, to the point of self-love, that you realized these things can live in harmony.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes a lot of digging and understanding and willingness to look in the mirror. Everything that we're talking about today. And And sometimes your values change over time.
Your identities change over time too.
Your identities change over time. And the meanings of your values change over time. And the meanings of your identities change over time. Everything is constantly changing. And I think that was something that was interesting for me too, both on the identity side and on the value side. Coming out of Tesla, it's like, okay, wait, now what? Like, who am I?
Yes.
Who am I right now? Yeah. And, it's taken 9 months up to this point to try and get some kind of clarity. But my values changed, my identity changed, and really trying to grapple with what that is and what it means and what it looks like has been a phenomenal exercise in learning and growth and leadership. And, I just think, like, what if we would have done this sooner? Like, what if I would have taken time to be this intentional and dig this deeply about what all of this meant and how I was showing up with my values and beliefs and my identities in each moment? What could have been different?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It took me honestly a year after my time at Tesla came to an end to understand how my identity as part of that organization really was the dominating identity for my life.
Yeah.
And that was challenging to come to terms with, because I do believe in the mission. I believed in what we were doing there, but it was hard to not do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, I remember, 6 months ago, 5 months ago, sitting at a brewery, the two of us having a conversation around, like, who am I?
Yeah.
What does this feel like after we're done with this, and trying to understand that our space in the universe, if not this thing that we thought we were so in at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the Tesla one's been really hard for me.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to talk to the women in charging group today, and it was amazing to kind of be back and talk to people about things that I cared about and people that understood,
sure,
at their core, the things that I believed in. So, there's still a piece of that identity that I'm grappling with. I think the other time that I really felt this was when I stopped playing basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you played sports,
yeah,
like when you realized you play your last game.
Yeah.
And, basketball had been my identity since the 5th grade.
Yeah.
And I had never not played. And so losing that as, Kristen being the basketball player, it was really difficult for me. But I was able to think about what were the pieces of that identity that made it so special and that were so formative, and that I wanted to carry forward in other facets of my life, like the competition, like the hustle, like the, winning, like the growth from losing. Those are still all things that are really part of who I am at my core, but that doesn't mean I have to play basketball every single day.
Or that your knees are going to give you the championship.
Thank you. You brought up my knees. That's what I was going to say. That, like, my knees could never handle that.
Yeah.
But, my values can, because I learned a lot from it. Yeah. And I think that's a piece of it, of, learning to love yourself, is having the courage to maybe hang up your hat from something, but take away the lessons that you can from it and bring that into whatever's new.
The concept of having this identity that's tied to a company or tied to a specific thing, and that thing comes to an ending. I'm seeing this challenge played out a lot right now with people who are being laid off from companies. This moment of, I can't believe this has come to this point. I can't believe that I was one of those that was laid off from the company, and dealing with not only the grief associated with that moment, but also the loss of identity associated with it. Because I think this is really an important part, honestly, for agency, is that's a moment of where someone's agency is taken from them, or they feel like they don't have agency. I won't say it's taken from them. They don't feel like they don't have agency. And I think exercises like what we're talking about before the moment, before they get to that point, are going to be critical for us as a collective work society as it is, to genuinely understand, hey, can be something that I'm part of now, but can change and probably will change at some point. The concept that my dad grew up with. My dad was a college professor, Marine also, still a Marine. I love you, Dad.
Set up.
No, he always corrects me when I mess that up. He was a college professor and was at the same school at Western Illinois University for 35 years or something like that. And that just isn't how obviously society operates right now. But I think it's that moment when people have that identity piece kind of torn away that makes it very difficult. And again, I'm seeing this time and time again, layoff after layoff after layoff.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's about doing the work.
Yeah.
And understanding what is it about the identity that is drawing you in, and get really clear about that. It's not the branded clothes. You know, we're both sitting in here in our Tesla black.
I've got my Yeti. I've got my Yeti sweatshirt on right now, so I'm there.
Yeah, it's not the clothes.
Yeah.
But there's something that is deeper in those organizations that is pulling on your identity and pulling you in. And so it's really understanding, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the brand. And that's something that's really hard for me to say and really hard for me to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Because folks will know I can't let the brand go.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And so, but what I've had to do is really understand that what I really cared about was the mission-focused environment. What I really cared about was the opportunity to do meaningful work. What I really cared about was the opportunity to work with people that worked as hard or harder than I did. What I really cared about were people whose values aligned with me. That isn't a Tesla thing.
No.
That is a thing that can be possible in other places.
Well, I think that goes into like one of the questions I want to ask today. Like, why is courage in this context so universal? Like, what about it is that it's crazy, but like as leading up to this, I was doing some research on it. Like, a lot of like the scholarly work around all of this comes back to things like courage for self-love in substance abuse patients, courage for self-love who experience traumatic experiences, folks who have physical or other disabilities. That's where the scientific work is around. Mm-hmm. But I think it's so much more than that. Absolutely. Because we all are going to experience courage at some point. Absolutely. Or have to face something with courage in the context that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would venture to say that this work environment right now is pretty traumatic.
Yes.
For all of the thousands, tens of thousands of people who are getting laid off, who, really felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves and bought into, the missions of places or what have you, who are now finding themselves on the outside. I mean, I know you and I have different interpretations of belonging and thoughts around that. We can talk about that.
We're going to. Yes, we're going to.
But I mean, this is like proving my point, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is why you don't belong to organizations, in the work sense, because it's not a fair fight.
Yeah, you're right. It's not fair, but and it's not set up to be fair in that sense. But that's why, like, we've always been really intentional about the way we talk about our teams. Yes. It's not a family.
Yes.
It's not a family.
Yes.
It's a community. It's an organization of people that come together to achieve something together, but it is not a family.
Yes, 100%. 100%. And I think if you can separate your identity, from that family like orientation, like a family is something that is forever, right? If you can find a way to separate that identity and like, yes, you work at a place. Yes, you have these certain values that you believe in. Yes, you have these certain things that you do that kind of bring you closer. I think like that's courageous to understand and be real about what is actually going on versus, and look, some companies, they are a family, like that's fine. But most of the time, that's just not the dynamic that is being set up. And so I feel like it is a look in the mirror moment of like, what is actually important to me? What about this is pulling on my identity in a good way? And how can I feel good about my time here, no matter how long or how short, that I have made an impact and that I know I can take this experience somewhere else or find these values somewhere else and go and contribute. And, I think that's we're trying to help folks find the courage in this moment to know that there is an other side.
There is. Yeah. There's no question about that.
There is another side, and there are other companies and other opportunities that will provide a similar experience with values and an environment that feels welcoming to you. It's just a matter of time before you find it.
Yeah. And I think that's really difficult for some folks to hear because they're trying. And that's, again, there's probably someone out there who might listen to this and say, like, I've done the work. I know who I am, and I'm still struggling to find that place. And there's no discounting that. Like that is a true struggle. But it is a moment of time to say, like, where am I going to belong? And I say that I'm tongue in cheek. I'm smiling at Chris right now, but I'm saying this tongue in cheek because I think there is an element of belonging, not to the organization, but to what you see in the organization, the values that are associated with that. So finding who you are and aligning yourself to that, what you see in those organizations, then you feel like you belong there.
Yes. Moment of agreement. I am with you on that. And I think that detaches you a little bit from getting sucked into like being, you know, a member of the brand, right? Or a member of, like, it gives you that distance and understanding of like, yes, I can belong to the values and to the commitments to culture or commitments to whatever an organization is doing in the world. Yes, that's fine. But it gets you at a distance to say, but I don't need to belong to a brand to be somebody or to be successful or to be a leader.
And that's really challenging in some instances because it's easier to assign yourself to a brand or to have that brand be part of your identity than doing the work and having courage to examine your values.
We're talking obviously about courage to look at yourself in the mirror and the self-love that you have to express, or the self-actualization. Actually, let's talk about that really quick. What's the difference between, what do you see the differences between self-love and self-actualization? Is it the same? Is it different? And in what differences do you draw, if you draw any?
I don't pass.
Pass?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that. I guess for me, the difference between self-love and self-actualization is self-love is I embrace every part of me. I am embracing the parts that I like, the parts that I don't like, and I'm willing to do the work where I see necessary for it. Self-actualization just for me is a concept that I recognize that those things are there. So I think this is why self-love is more powerful, specifically when we're talking about doing the work of acting with agency, doing the work to understand your values, to understand where you need to improve, where you think you need to get better, where you think you need to change, because the love piece of it is something that drives that passion to change. The actualization is that, okay, I recognize who I am, but that doesn't mean I'm going to actually do anything about it.
Right. Yeah. So kind of the awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I look at it as more like self-awareness versus self-love.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah. I think awareness and actualization in this context could probably be interchanged, at least in the definition that I'm presenting for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think awareness to me, I mean, that feels a little bit easier to attain. Like, I think a lot of people have some, maybe not, some people have some self-awareness about who they are and their beliefs.
Yeah,
right?
But I think that's the stepping stone, right? Like it's self-awareness first, then self-love.
Yeah.
If we're looking at this as a linear journey.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, like I had to catch myself there for a second saying like, oh, all people are self-aware. They're not. Like
No.
we've met folks who aren't self-aware. And so I do believe that in some cases and in some parts of your identities and your beliefs and values, that has to come first. You have to have some kind of understanding and awareness about what's going on before you can learn to love it. I think there's some other pieces that don't take work and you can just jump straight to like, yes, this is who I am and I'm all about it. And I think that's different for every person. Like the amount of work that it takes to get there for these different components is going to be different for everybody. And the journey is going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think there has to be some kind of, the way I used to talk about this was like awareness and then acceptance. And then you could move into love. And so I think there are definitely some steps that kind of come before, totally feeling yourself.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting to say that it's for some people it's going to come easy and for some it's not. But I think there's a common trigger that people can kind of see in real time. Dan Pink wrote a book about this, but I think it's really interesting, the power of regret, like how regret can act as a trigger to, oh, there's something about that doesn't feel right. I feel bad about that. There's something about that I'm getting this feedback, this internal dissonance about it that I think is really critical. And it can be a huge motivator for self-learning and self-reflection, but it's a feeling that everybody has.
Right. And I think those are the moments, if you're feeling regret about something, that was probably a moment that mattered. First.
Yeah.
Second, really listening to that feedback and taking the time to sit with it and be with it and look at it and hear it and touch it and feel it and all of the things. The more you can understand what the feedback means and what it was about that situation that is causing the reaction, then I think that can help pique your awareness about other opportunities that come up that might be similar, right? We were talking in the speech a little bit, but today, with the team over at Tesla too, about there are opportunities that come at you every single day that you have the opportunity to say yes or no to. And courage plays a piece of this, and self-love plays in a piece of this, to say, if I say yes, what's that going to look like?
Right.
I'm a big pro-con person. So what are the pros? What are the cons? What are my non-negotiables? And how am I taking what I learned from this, regret and bouncing that up against this new opportunity that is in front of me? So you're taking, applying the drill, right?
Yeah.
To really say, should I say yes or should I say no? And I think what happens a lot of times is people are quick to one of those two, answers, either just quick to say yes without thought, and then they might find themselves in situations that maybe don't work out, maybe might lead to a different kind of regret, or quick to say no because fear overtakes what could be possible in the moment.
Yeah.
And so really having a system to analyze situations that may have caused regret, understand how that's going to impact your life going forward, and being able to call upon that in these moments when you're faced with a decision to have the courage to say yes or the courage to say no based on that feedback from that moment.
That's something that we learned a lot about, honestly, at Tesla, but it came from the manufacturing process. It's funny when you say that. Like there's this technique that I've used a lot in my life, and I've seen used in other contexts, specifically in quality control and quality systems. It's called the 5 Why technique. It came from Japan in the manufacturing industry, specifically Toyota. It's a problem-solving methodology that's used to identify root causes for problems in the production process, but it can also be applied to working on your own self-awareness. And the process to do it is relatively simple. So first, you start by identifying the problem. So whatever the issue, behavior, habit it is you want to address. The second is just ask why 5 times. You want to get to the root cause. So each time you ask why, you should answer it honestly and be honest with yourself about it. For example, why do I procrastinate on important tasks? Well, because I feel overwhelmed by the size of the task. Okay. Why do I feel overwhelmed? Well, because I don't know where to start. Why don't I know where to start? Because I haven't broken the task down into smaller, manageable steps. Why haven't I broken the task down? Because I'm not sure how to do it. Why am I not sure how to do it? Because I haven't done enough research or asked for help or seen the model of it. After you're going through each of these steps, and at the end, you're reflecting on your answers. So this is really the third piece of it. To see, what are the underlying beliefs or values or emotions that you might have that maybe would be contributing to the problem. And then, that gives you an opportunity to change your behavior, to set a plan in action. So the 4th step is actually developing a plan to address the root cause of the problem. And that could be, for the example, setting smaller achievable goals, seeking help from others, or learning new skills as part of the process. And then the 5th step is just to monitor your progress. So track your success over time. If you're struggling, repeat the 5 Whys process again, dig deeper, and
make adjustments to your action plan.
A simple technique like this gives you the opportunity to really be critical, maybe not in the moment, but after the fact. And it's an easy technique that everyone can practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great tool for folks to use. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the pro-con list. And so really doing like retros on some of the decisions that you've made and understand like, why was that a good decision? Why was it a bad decision? What did you learn? And what are your non-negotiables coming out of it? And I think having tools like this in your pocket when moments come up are really, really important. You know, in a lot of these places, decisions get made very quickly.
Yes.
And so if you don't have something in your back pocket to at least help you triage in the moment what you're going to say or do, then you might be repeating over and over, saying yes to things you shouldn't, or saying no to things that, or saying yes to things that, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But really like having a go-to, whether it's the 5 whys or whether it's
Sure.
just like pro-conning it, helps you make a good informed decision versus just shooting from the hip and hoping that all goes well this time.
Yeah, and that's why we consider this a practice, right? It is not about getting it right all the time, and it's not about being done. Like there's no done with this. There's no done with this until you're done as a person. But like there really is this opportunity to be better in the moment because you've practiced, because you've gone through and done the work, because you've had the conversations and had the reflection over the course of time that gives you that ability to then say, in this moment, boom, I know what I'm doing with this because I'm able to do that mental math a little faster.
Absolutely. I think that comes back to courage, because maybe it's not just the courage in the moment to make the decision yes or no, or I will or I won't, but it's the courage that happens beforehand to take the time to do the work and to really look in the mirror and triage and understand what was going on. All of that is rooted in love of yourself and understanding yourself and wanting to be able to make better decisions or decisions that have the impact that you want by loving yourself enough to understand what's going on and to do what's right for you when presented with opportunities.
I think that's a great point to say, like, where's the starting point for leaders as part of this? You know, if we're saying that like having this courage is the you know, one of the foundational pieces of truly understanding and making good decisions. Like, why is this the starting point for leaders? Like, why is this the part that we're saying, leaders, you need to take time to understand yourself?
Yeah. I mean, how are you going to lead people if you don't understand yourself and what you care about and what you believe and understand how you show up in the world and what's important to you? It's not impossible. You know, you can fake your way through it for a little bit, but if you want to develop a team that gets stuff done and takes care of themselves and are good human beings, then you have to show up and do the work yourself first. Otherwise, you're asking the people on your team to do work you haven't done.
And you can't relate to, and they're going to be able to see that.
Exactly. And that's not going to build the trust or the respect or the rapport that leaders need in those tough moments.
Yeah.
Where it calls for people to have courage, and it calls for a leader to have courage because there is none.
Yeah. I think thinking of it in terms of practice too, like, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be able to rise to that moment. And it's going to be less authentic than if you had put that time and effort in before. You're not going to be able to manage stress. You're not going to be able to manage anxiety or change. And those are all really critical components of leadership, in the sense that you need to not only be able to manage your own emotions, how you respond to that situation, but also help others manage their emotions at that time, because you're not thinking about yourself.
Right. And it all takes courage.
Yes.
It all takes courage. And so if you don't start there and don't start with understanding deeply who you are, the rest of it, some of it may fall into place, but the rest of it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. Again, we say this, we've seen leaders who can shoot from the hip. We've seen leaders who can, to your point, fake it till you make it, but at a certain point, that breaks down.
Yeah. Every single time.
Yes.
Every single time. And you know, it may not break down to an entire organization, but it'll break down to the people that are directly in your charge. They know.
Yeah.
and then they make decisions accordingly. And so I think that's a piece of it. When you start to ask yourself, who do you want to be every day when you show up to work in front of your team, in front of your organization, you got to know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if you don't, that causes the team to tell a bunch of stories about, or have to guess who you are, or tell stories about why you do something and why you said this. And, there's a whole lot of inconsistency that can bubble up. And so really getting clear about who you want to be every day when you're with your team, it's not easy, but it's necessary for a leader to really have the impact that they want to have in an organization.
That brings us to our next podcast topic, where we're going to talk about authenticity. Our next episode is going to be called Authenticity. And we're going to talk about how leaders show up authentically and the impact that has on an organization. Because ultimately that's the goal, is so that way you are able to show up authentically in who you are, represent who you are, make decisions based upon that, but also that create that space for those around you to do the same and have a kick-ass team as part of it as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I think what's going to be interesting about the conversation is, authenticity for some people, that isn't good.
Yeah.
And so how do you start to assess? And I think it starts with, self-love and courage and all the things, but how do you start to recognize how showing up authentically lands with other people, and if you're having the impact that you want, or if, maybe being authentically you, there's some work that you have to get there. So I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation to really talk about, some folks will tell you they're showing up authentically, and it is bad news for everybody.
Yeah. I'm excited about that too, because I think there's a component of self-love with this that
yes,
if you're able to look at yourself in more real terms,
yes,
it gives you the capacity to look at others in the same way, where that's something that makes it a lot easier to see when people are being authentic.
Yes.
But also makes it a lot easier for those that aren't being authentic. If they do the practice, then they can say, oh, I'm not. And this is the impact that it's having as well. But again, we're going to get into all of that in our next episode in the Agency Unlocked series called Authenticity. Kristen's USC speech is now live on YouTube and is part of our company page. So you can check out her journey to see how this all got started. We reference it a lot in this, and I know that it's just an amazing representation of Kristen and what a keynote speech and the power that a keynote speech can have. If you're interested in connecting with us to have Kristen come speak for your organization, you can always reach out at our website, www.agency-initiative.com/contact. Kristen, as always, it's been a pleasure. This was a really cool episode as far as, diving into your journey for self-love and talking about courage. And I can't wait to get into authenticity next week.
Same here. Always a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Agency Initiative Podcast. To take the first steps into your journey, or to dive deeper into what agency means in your life, check out www.agency-initiative.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Agency Initiative and on LinkedIn at our company page. If you're interested in working with us or joining us on this podcast, we want to hear from you. Send us a note at our contact page at www.agency-initiative.com/contact.